Hi guys, welcome to our webinar today. We know Programmatic, Ask Us Anything with Hanapin Marketing. My name is Emma Franks. I'm an account manager here at Hanapin. You'll see me on the PPC Hero blog, mostly posting about PPC news updates. We also have Bryan Gaynor here with us today. He is an account manager as well here at Hanapin, and he is another regular PPC Hero blogger. You can tweet at Bryan at BryanGaynor12 or tweet at me throughout the webinar, aka Emma Louise.
Good afternoon, folks. So just a little bit about who Hanapin is. We are the agency who run the world's most popular PPC blog, PPC Hero, as well as the world's biggest PPC-only conference, HeroConf. This April, we'll be in Los Angeles for our US Hero Conference, and you'll be able to find out more about that at heroconf.com. And actually, myself, I'll be there in April. I'll actually be presenting on Programmatic for PPC managers. So hopefully, if this session you enjoy this session today, you'll be able to hear a little bit more in depth at HeroConf in April. A little bit more about Hanapin Marketing. We are an industry-leading digital marketing agency that manages and optimizes clients' paid search, paid social, and display programs. Even better is that clients will see their accounts grow 250% faster after signing with us, and to date we have about a 93% retention rate. So if you're looking for a team of experts, we have a building full of them. And just a little look into who our clients are. We work with a variety of major brands, Fortune 500 companies in a variety of verticals. And to check out who some more of our clients are, go to hanapinmarketing.com for more.
We also invite you to interact with us throughout this webinar on Twitter using the hashtag ThinkPPC in your tweets. You can also use the question box within the webinar to send us your questions throughout. We will be answering questions at the end of the webinar from those that were submitted with the sign up, but if we have extra time, we'd also love to answer any questions that you have as we go throughout the webinar, and we'll be able to answer those questions directly. All right, so to start off, we want to get a poll of how long you guys have been working with Programmatic. So you can either tweet your answer, ThinkPPC, or we invite you to use the quick poll to just submit less than 1 year, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, or 5+ years. So for us, Bryan, do you want to start how long you've been working in Programmatic?
Yeah, so I've been in Programmatic for about 3.5 years, and before that I was in search for about another year, and on top of it, search is part of my day-to-day as well. I was sort of just thrown into it. My previous agency just decided we're going to do Programmatic here, figure it out and learn it, and yeah, it's definitely been a strange, long journey over the last couple of years. What about you, Emma? How long have you actually been in Programmatic?
So I fall into this 1 to 3 years category. I took it on early in 2016. Was kind of my first foray, also coming from search. So I really am more of a PPCer working in Programmatic than anything else. And it looks like about 70% of the audience is less than 1 year, another 25% of 1 to 3 years, and then 5% with you, Bryan, at the 3 to 5 year range. So I think this will be really good for us to delve into how to use Programmatic as a part of PPC strategy, especially with 70% being less than 1 year into the Programmatic field. All right. So first of all, we wanted to go over what do we mean when we say Programmatic. I feel like that's a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot, especially in the past couple of years. It's really been a big push, the future is Programmatic, but what are we talking about? For me as a PPCer, I was so intimidated the first time that I learned about Programmatic in the first couple of trainings that we had, And it really comes down to just real-time automated auctions. So as PPCers, we are familiar with auctions. That's how we run everything. And programmatic is basically the same as what we're seeing in other platforms, but there's just an added layer of, in addition to the buyers competing for impressions, we also have different ad exchanges that work with the actual website or the provider to serve those ads. So Bryan, did you want to share that analogy that we were talking about earlier with the SSP and investments?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way that I have been able to explain programmatic to people in a more simple focus is I looked at a startup who is looking for financing as the easiest way to break it down. So right now, you have three different layers of how a website makes money from advertising. They have their direct sales, they have what's called a private exchange or PMP or private marketplace, and then they have the open exchange. So when you look at a startup who's going for financing, typically a lot of the initial financing then is either from direct from friends or family, or they go to a bank for a loan. The next step is outside directed direct investors or private investors, and eventually you go to an IPO if you're lucky enough, like Snapchat did last week. It's the same sort of steps in display advertising. So most of the major publishers will have a direct sales team. They'll sell a certain amount of impressions to companies to be on certain pages for a certain set price, and that will run for various flights over time. Then the next sort of layer is an initial auction that publishers invite advertisers to come to via either DSP, their demand side platform, or through a direct exchange they develop themselves. And then once that inventory is then sold to their premium advertisers at the higher cost, the remaining inventory starts going on to what's called the open exchange. So the open exchanges consist of traditionally the GDN or the Google Display Network, which most people are pretty familiar with, but there's then also about 90 other different exchanges or inventory sources that then have access to that inventory, and then it goes on to an auction where advertisers bid in a similar fashion to the GDN with layered on targeting, and an auction takes place, and then the ad is served. And this all happens within milliseconds in the same way a search auction or a Facebook auction takes place. Once someone loads a page, the backend ad server calls out to all the different various exchanges, and then within that millisecond, there's an auction winner is determined, and then from there the impression is served.
Thanks. So another thing that we wanted to point out with programmatic is that it's very audience and persona focused. Really, it's about being in the right place at the right time, knowing who you want to show your ad to, and rather than keyword targeting, really meeting them where they are. And there are a lot of reasons why we love programmatic, but two of the biggest are that it's data-driven and it's automated. So we love data. Data informs a lot of our decisions, especially here at Hanapin. And automation, although it's a scary thing, it really is beautiful because it frees up time that we can focus on, the strategy behind our accounts and really digging into what's driving users through the funnel, or what can we do to really optimize. It saves time without having so much day-to-day focus. Bryan's also going to talk about the reach that you can get through programmatic that's not available just through GDN or the other search and social platforms that we're used to. There's also a lot of transparency and control that we can get through programmatic that we can't get just through using AdWords or other of those big name providers that we're used to. So you can see here in this visualization, there are so many data sources that can be accessed through programmatic. And that really just helps to provide a greater insight into the audiences and allow us to shape our messaging to our audiences more accurately. Now, programmatic can also be confusing, and this diagram kind of shows all of the things that go into a programmatic exchange and how it gets from the marketer to the publisher and ultimately to the audience. So this is one reason that programmatic can be intimidating when you first hear about it, or when you're first digging in, but it really, as Bryan talked to, is not as intimidating, and we want to help try to break it down for you guys today.
Yeah, and I think, just going back to what you said, I think looking at this when, I know when I started programmatic, I was told to find a good demand side partner, uh, demand side publisher partner. I've also looked for data partners, and there's so many different companies. I think it goes down to, what does your company need and how big. Like, for the most part, if you have every layer of that landscape, you're probably a major enterprise brand who has hundreds of millions of dollars to spend just dedicated to branding and programmatic alone. So I think it's good to look at where a lot of people are right now with PPC sort of dipping their toes into programmatic and look at the benefits of both GDN and programmatic as well, and seeing where do I start. I think for me, the first thing I've always looked for is a really good demand side platform. So whether that be a DoubleClick, a MediaMath, Trade Desk, Turn, I think that's the first real key piece to create a good programmatic strategy. And it gives you opportunity to figure out how to run strategy, how to create a strategy that works for you. And if you just move on to the next slide, I think we'll talk about a little bit more of comparing. We're not trying to say that GDN is still not valuable. It is, and even we still have access to some text ads that people generally can resonate more with, as they rather than a display ad, if the display ad is not as eye-catching or it's annoying. But as we've started to see Google now transition more from text ads on the display network to a more responsive ad, we're starting to see that shift towards a better visual aspect of your strategy. You can't just rely on text ads anymore. You really need to start evolving how you capture your users' attention and move towards a more display-focused part of your tactic. And as well, AdWords obviously has a lot of features that this programmatic doesn't have. Obviously, you have RLSA, you can pay just on a CPC or cost per view or type of bid. The biggest difference in programmatic is for the most part, you're paying on a CPM basis for every. So you're paying basically for every 1,000 impressions, you're paying a varied price, and so you may see a rise in CPC, you may a rise in cost per view, or even and that, I think that's one of the biggest sticker shocks that people see as they move from what they know in GDN to a demand side platform. Well, let's look at the benefits that programmatic has. You have up to twice the reach that the GDN has. So not only do you have access to all of Google's inventory already, but you have access to 90 different other inventory sources. This not only increases your prospect and audience potential, but also when you have the same remarketing audiences that you've had in GDN, when you transfer those pixels over, or when you create pixels in your demand side platform, you also have much better reach to your own remarketing audience. So you're not just relying on Google's inventory, but also, again, that extra two times amount of inventory as well. And I think for me, the final piece is the integration you can have with demand side platforms for using external data in terms of third-party data, like from the likes of BlueKai, Xlate, Oracle, where these companies have already pixeled people, categorized them into certain types of audience personas, like we were talking about a little bit earlier. It's a huge part of what Programmatic can offer. And yes, you do pay a little bit extra for this data, but over time you start to see that cost come down because the quality of people you're bringing in at the top of the funnel will then be recaptured through remarketing at a much lower cost. So the advertise that it's a full funnel approach, and it's not just we think this will work because Google says it does, but we know these people are based on their actual activity across the board. You're paying for a higher quality customer to come to your site.
And that's definitely something that we've noted in our use of programmatic, is that it's increased the quality of our user base in addition to the quantity. Going off of what you were talking about with the full funnel approach, thinking about how programmatic can fit in with other PPC strategies, it really does do a lot to fill the funnel with, as you were saying, Bryan, that quality traffic. So using the insights that you have already from search and analytics, people that are engaging with your content, people that are converting, using that to build the personas that are then targeted through programmatic and speaking directly to those individuals, getting them into that awareness at the top of the funnel. And then once they're already in the funnel, continuing to re-engage them through remarketing tactics, or other than just RLSA, remarketing to them outside of the Google network, really wherever they are on the web, just continually reminding them about your brand and why they should return to engage with that. We've seen our search traffic not just increase, but the quality of our search traffic, especially for the branded campaigns, really increased since we started focusing in programmatic. The next aspect that programmatic can complement is your social strategy. So if you have a social marketing strategy to greet your audience or introduce people to your brand before you even engage with them through social media, so they're already aware of who you are when you start to communicate with them through social, and then maintaining that consistency in your brand values and personalities across the various media. Having I think of Southwest as an example. I see them across so many different marketing channels, but it's very consistent and in alignment across the channels. And I think that that's something that programmatic can do, is just keeping that in front of your users and engaging with them in a variety of ways. And of course, for display, as Bryan mentioned, there's so much that Google Display Network or other display networks offer, and programmatic can amplify the success that you've seen there. So one strategy that we used was taking our managed placements that we found in AdWords to be really high performing and transitioning those into our programmatic targeting as well, so that we can get better rates for more ad images through programmatic for those placements that we already know are effective. And then, as Bryan talked to earlier as well, the increased transparency and really being able to hone your targeting to the users and the personas that you want to build on.
Yeah, and I think for me that's a really big thing that I've seen in campaigns I've run in the past is, I use the example of a high-end e-commerce company who is, you're always going to get people at different levels of spending, different levels of income, coming, browsing your site, being able to, looking around. And where programmatic, I think, can really come in and add value is you have this huge remarketing pool, and maybe about 30 to 40% of them are actually qualified customers who will actually end up buying. So what I've tested in the past and what I've seen other advertisers do is, as they've brought a remarketing pool in, is actually layered on like third-party behavioral data, such as like high-end shoppers or people who have income over $100,000 a year, but just by making those small changes to their audience or the level of audience that they reach out to, it creates a more customized advertised approach where they can maybe test showing the price in the ad versus not, bringing people back in who maybe be turned off by sticker shock or other different things that would disqualify them from buying. And by doing that, I've seen, or you see a direct impact on CPM maybe going up slightly, or in your overall CPC, but the ROAS, or return on ad spend, goes up overall, just because you're paying a little bit more for a qualified user, but by bringing them in, they're more likely to buy. I think that's the biggest thing that I found with Programmatic as well, just that extra layers you can add on to really customize your marketing strategy to that nearly that one-on-one relationship that nearly mimics what you do with social. You really segment your audiences and really show them really unique messaging that really resonates with them, and with that increases brand loyalty. Because I know I browse different e-commerce sites, and I see something, I'm like, it's way out of my budget, and I'll bounce, and I still see ads day after day after day, and it nearly annoys me way more, and it turns me off that brand as a whole, just because maybe it's because I'm in the industry and I know that you can control this a lot more, but it creates a bad brand perception and turn people off your brand just because it feels spammy and it feels like they're just pushing. We have to look more towards a pull approach where you want to make people want to come to your brand and create that brand loyalty overall.
As we talked about earlier, Brian, really shaping the messaging for the user and where you're finding them. Do you want to talk to some of the things to look out for and how we can pull insights from the programmatic transparency?
Yeah, so like I said, you're probably in the same boat as me, and you're sort of, when you move from PPC to programmatic, there's a lot of different nuances that you don't think to look for. And one of the biggest things I found once I figured it out was, the first thing is look at my exchange reports. Like I said, there's up to 90 different inventory sources, so you're not just relying on the GDN, where you just have a place report and that's it. You have to look at how your ads are performing in different exchanges. Part of the reason being is a lot of major publishers will not just have one exchange on their site. They'll have multiple different inventory sources, so they're making the most of their excess inventory on the open exchange. So, what I've seen from times is I'll pull an exchange report and I'll see one exchange really dominate my volume of impressions, but the ROI is just not there. So when I scale it back, I've tested removing that exchange. My overall scale may drop, but my ROAS and my actual volume of revenue might actually go up because I'm getting better efficiency out of my budget on a day-to-day basis. I think it's also a great way to be able to identify potential fake traffic or bot traffic. And then this is where analytics comes into play as well, where if you pull an exchange report and you're seeing a display campaign pull in 2, 3, 4, 5% CTR over the course of a week, something doesn't resonate with that, because typically in display we see up to about 1%. It's more on the remarketing side, but in prospect display I'm seeing between about 1.1 or 0.5%, depending on the type of campaign and the type of creative. And so I had a client before Christmas where I pulled the exchange report. I saw one exchange over the course of a week was getting a 3% fixture rate. I went into analytics, looked down to the campaign level. I saw I had a bounce rate of 95%. The time on site was less than 10 seconds, and the CPA the conversion rate was non-existent. I went in, I pulled that exchange, and things resumed to normal after that, and we started seeing normalcy come in our analytics. So I think that's one of the biggest things I've noticed from going from PPC to programmatic is those little small, that first thing of looking at the different exchanges and getting used to remembering, okay, there's other sources that I have to look at and make sure we're on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
The next one, I think, is something we're all aware of. Like, people respond differently on different devices, and there's also going to be a different type of campaign for different devices. And in AdWords now and in the display network, we can have bid modifiers for smartphone, desktop, or tablet. One of the great things I love about programmatic is you can get even deeper than just the device type. You can get into, depending on the DSP, you can get down to even the device level, even the carrier someone is on. So I use the analogy of if AT&T, especially after launching the iPhone 7, they could run it. In theory, they could run a campaign um, to Verizon the Verizon users who have an iPhone 6s to come to with a specific message, come to AT&T, get a free iPhone, and we'll pay out your contract. That it comes to that level of like really true one-to-one messaging that really resonates with customers, and then it has that customer and brand relationship. I think another thing to look at as well when it comes to devices is our does our website work well on respond well on all devices? So yeah, we have the access and analytics, but we're still advertising to people on iPhone, we're on Android, there's people on Samsung, on HTC, on iPhone 7, iPhone 6, iPhone 5 SE. So I think it gets down to you get so granular to the point where you can really start to segment your campaigns and also get a little bit insight of how your own website performs overall. So not just from your programmatic advertising, your display advertising, or search, but look at your direct traffic, your organic traffic, your social traffic, and to get a true understanding of how your mobile user is performing, and to shift your strategy or shift your UX development to work better for certain devices. And then finally, again, this is something I think that most people who've run GDN are definitely used to, is looking at placement reports. But I always like to remind people to look at their site list, because you have so much more inventory, and because a lot of sites have multiple different exchanges. What I generally like to do is run a site list report and filter by exchange. So again, we can see how the different exchanges affect the performance on the site as well. And just one of the big things as well, because you're paying for that impression, you're not paying for a click anymore in programmatic. You're paying for an impression. You want to make sure every impression is as valuable as it possibly can be. So you want to make sure you're filtering by your top performance sites, and maybe segmenting out into separate campaigns to, like you mentioned at the start, where you found your best GDN sites and you tested programmatic and seen them work way better. But I think it also gives you a better insight of where your audience is on a daily basis. So it helps create and shape that audience and persona type targeting as well over time.
Absolutely. And with these things to look out for, obviously, also keeping in mind the same insights that we do get from AdWords or other platforms, looking at location, things like that, that maybe the performance on the programmatic side is different than what you're seeing in search or social or other display networks.
Yeah, exactly. I think like any industry, or like every part of the industry has some flaws with it. Obviously, ad fraud has been a big talking point over the last couple of years. I know at one point a couple of years ago, there was estimating about 30% of um, all display impressions were generated by bots or non-human traffic. And over time, technology's evolved, and there is companies out there that, again, you can access it through a demand-side platform to layer onto your targeting to help filter out 90 to 95% of bot traffic with 100% confidence that all the traffic you are getting is from that source is real people. Again, it's something that's why it's important to be constantly monitoring your exchange reports, your site reports, and make sure that there's no strange occurrences of like high CTR or really high volume of clicks from a certain source. The next one, obviously, brand safety, have those filters in the GDN, in certain demand side platform like DoubleClick, which is owned by Google. You have very similar layers of brand protection, but you also have the option to bring in third-party partners where they filter down to the page level or keyword level, even in some cases, to be able to really filter out really poor quality traffic. Make sure that everything you show is within your brand guidelines, and you're showing a quality where you want to be, and to reach your audience where they're supposed to be. And then finally, cost. I mean, I think one of the biggest roadblocks to enter Programmatic for a lot of people has been high minimums for a lot of the major DSPs, the likes of DoubleClick and MediaMap. To work directly with them, there's a lot of hoops to jump through in terms of level of ad spend where you have to be at. One thing I will say, a lot of those, if you don't reach their high minimums, a lot of them have direct partners that they work with as resellers, where they can, you get access to their seat at the various demand side platforms, and you've minimal to no minimum to work with them and get access to all this inventory. There are some smaller DSPs out there, and then they vary in the level of sophistication that you have with them. But again, there is options out there for people wanting to test it out. And then, like I mentioned earlier, you're switching from a CPC type based bidding and cost to you're paying for the impression. So again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier on again, where you have to make sure you're constantly monitoring things, making sure you're getting the most value of each impression, because you're paying for that impression no matter what. You're not just paying for the click on that ad.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I think that leads into the first question that we have here for our live Q&A. Is what is your optimization process like, and how do you add value with it being so automated? So I think, just as you were saying, making sure that you are trying to look at all of those factors that go into it, and understanding that you're paying for that impression. How can you make that impression worthwhile? So I think it starts with the targeting, knowing your audience, making sure that you're utilizing all of those tools and all of the data and information that's available, and then also just monitoring, your bids and your budgeting, that you're looking at the big picture of how those little adjustments are affecting your overall campaign performance, and just building off of that.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect point, Emma. I think one of the great things about Programmatic, a lot of it is automated. The bidding algorithms behind a lot of these Programmatic platforms is amazing, where it goes beyond even comprehension at some point when you talk to the reps and talk to their engineers. But like any automation, there is going to be limitations what you can do with it. So, I'm sure a lot of people listening today have tested automation in search and social. Obviously, in Facebook, a lot of it is automated bidding, but you have the potential then to lose scale to try and reach those automated goals. So if you try to do a CPA bid, it takes time and tweaking to figure out what the ultimate bid is to get within your goal. But then, because the algorithm is trying to get a low CPA, it won't reach as many people, because it's still trying to find what it deems as the right person. And that's one thing where I think you can add value, where we add value is by managing it on your own. Is I regularly test manual bidding, where I set the bids myself, I tweak it, and I adjust it on a weekly or monthly basis, depending on how the campaign is performing. One, to increase scale, to make sure we're reaching as much of our audience we possibly can, and two, to make sure that we're keeping costs under control. So if I see that I'm reaching all of my audience, but only 10% or 20% of my audience is actually coming to my site, then I look to scale it back to make sure we're focusing on we're not overpaying for those impressions. And again, it goes back to monitoring every aspect of every type of metric. So it's not just your impression volume or your CTR or your CPC, but it's also looking at the back end data, looking at the time on site, the engagement, especially at the prospecting level. I think they're very important metrics to look at. We're bringing people in from the prospecting level, but do they actually care what once they get there? Are they just coming in looking for 10, 15 seconds advancing? Are they going 2, 3, 4 pages deep in the site? Are they, spending 3 to 4 minutes browsing, reading about our brand, getting to know it a little bit better? And I know those people are more likely to come back and revert to remarketing if they don't convert straight away. And then looking at overall return on investment as well. I think that's a huge metric to look. I think that's one of the primary metrics to look at, because I think you and me, Emma, talked about this earlier on. Last stick is dying if it's not already dead. It's a metric that we can't really look at anymore with 100% accuracy. Every single line item is going to have a step in. Like I've looked at my conversion path analytics, and some have 1 to 2 steps, some have 102 steps, and I think it's framing into a full funnel strategy to know where Programmatic fits in the funnel. Same with social, same with search, and trying to sculpt an overall strategy and overall performance metric and that's, I think, where humans add value to the automated process.
Absolutely. I had a a blog post earlier in the week that talked about looking at ROAS specifically with lead gen, but that's something that we've noticed, that since we've delved into programmatic, the revenue has increased significantly, even with the additional cost of running programmatic. That we've definitely seen that lift in ROI as well. Even though, as you said, it's not a last click attribution, that you can still have that contributing to the overall success of your campaigns.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good point, and I read that blog earlier on. It's really insightful, and I think that's what because we're so data focused, I think sometimes we forget about the overall marketing strategy of it and looking at a really segmented level. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. So, so
Go
just
ahead.
moving on to the next question. So how do I explain Programmatic to a client without it sounding like it's just GDN or AdWords display advertising? So I think for me, I just, like we talked about, I explain it as the added reach. You have a little bit more transparency of how you control it, and then on top of it, it's the added layer of technology. So the bidding algorithm that you can use and adjust over time, and as well as the third-party data you can bring in, as well as the integration with your first-party data management platforms as well. So if you're a bigger brand who has access to, say, an Oracle DMP, you can integrate that data to bring in your own lookalike models that have been specifically created for you, so it makes sense to your own company and over historical data before you even start Programmatic. So I think for me, it's the technology behind it, the added sophistication of the third-party data, and as well as the integration of first-party data as well, to really enhance your remarketing efforts.
Absolutely. I would agree with all of that. I think that it really just provides opportunity to expand the kind of opportunities that are available in AdWords display advertising, but then just, as you said, layers on those additional features that you can utilize through programmatic.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, you were starting to see a shift towards, there's managed service out there with second-party data as well, which is basically retailers will collect and anonymize a lot of their data and resell it to these companies, where they'll create those personas as well to shape an ideal customer base for your product. And again, it's a managed service, so it's not as controllable, but it's definitely something worth taking a look at as well.
I think that really jumps into this question: how can agencies with no programmatic experience and clients with more moderate budgets leverage programmatic? So really taking advantage of those second party or programmatic partners, and building on that. Or if you don't have the minimum threshold spend on your own, utilizing one of those partners to still be able to have access to the ad exchanges that are available.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest stumbling block a lot of people do run into, and I think a lot of it is I think one thing that's people forget to think about is a lot of philosophies that us as PPC managers have do transfer um, over to programmatic. So we've all we've laid out the strategy, we've implemented the campaign, we've analyzed the data, we've made the adjustments. I think that's the biggest thing. That's one of the biggest things as well that scares people is, can I actually figure this out and work? But once you spend a little bit of time in it, and I compare it to when someone else tells me they're kind of afraid to test programmatic in house, I ask them, do they do social? And compare it to that shift where Facebook 2 years ago was a completely new thing, or even 3 years ago was a new thing for people to really test out on a wide scale. Whereas now it's become more and more part of the day-to-day strategy. Even here at Hanapin, we see more and more social campaigns on a monthly basis, and then programmatic is that it's taking that same mentality they took in the social. It's all the same philosophy. It's all the same tactics. It's just a different approach, a little more granular in the levels of details that you can really get into. That is the major difference.
Yeah. And I think also keeping in mind that it's okay not to know everything at the start. So you and I both got into programmatic just with the basics and have since built on that knowledge. But understanding that you may not know everything at the beginning and that that's okay. You can work with the data that you have, you can work with the insights that you gain along the way, and you'll get more comfortable with it as you continue.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the biggest thing. It's all about we're constantly learning. Even search. I mean, I've been in search for 4 and a bit years, and I'm still learning every day. And you still make you still make mistakes. You learn from your mistakes. And you learn from every day you're in the platform. You find something new, or you find a new way to look at something, and you slice things up in a different way, and it actually makes more sense after that. So I think that's definitely a really good point.
And we should also talk about for those that want to partner with one of those providers or just looking at DSP services. This question is, what DSP service should I use, and what is your recommendation?
So again, it's a very open-ended question. I mean, if you go back to the Luma landscape, there's a lot of choices out there, and each one has its benefits, each one has its downfall. The ones I've worked with most in the past have been DoubleClick, Bid Manager, the Trade Desk, MediaMath, and Site Scout, which is now Central DSP. They're the ones I've worked with the most. Again, I've had success with all of them. I've had bad performance with all of them. So it's about the way I've always looked at working programmatic is, or choosing my DSP, um, especially if I have a smaller budget. Like my previous agent, we worked with moderate to medium budgets for the most part. So I looked at the pricing with that second party partner. The way Programmatic works is generally most DSP vendors will take a 15 to 20% on top of your media spend. It's usually baked into your overall bid and your overall budget, but it's something to be aware of. If you work directly with the vendors, it's usually at the 15%. If you work with a second party partner, it may rise to 18 to 20%, depending on what their business model is.
Mhm.
Um, I think what I look for is one, the pricing. I think that's a big thing, depending on how much your client is willing to give up to the access to this. I think two is the level of support you get for the level of spend you're at. For me, I think that's a big thing, especially if you're new to programmatic. Having really good support or really responsive support, I found was the biggest help to me to one, not only help me onboard my clients into a DSP, but also to learn the platform and learn the strategies a little bit quicker. So like you said, Emma, it's no one's going to go into this knowing everything, but the more help you can get is definitely a huge benefit. And then finally, you know, it's hard to tell when you're starting out with a platform, but I always look at, after 6 months or when I come to the end of my contract, how did it perform? Did I really get value out of it? One way to maybe look at that before you sign a contract with a DSP is look at reviews. Just basically Google, media math reviews, double click reviews. There is services out there that, and I'll tweet it out afterward, the ones I've used in the past that um, people have given really honest feedback, and I've reached out to them directly before I'd sign with a DSP, and I get candid feedback. And I think that's the best thing. We are a network. That's one thing about PPC. We are a huge PPC family, and people are not afraid to, give advice on their experience with different platforms. I've had great success with DoubleClick, but found it's had some of its limitations. In one thing I don't like about their bid manager platform is you can't bulk upload ads, so it's a bit of a hard process if you have a lot of ads to traffic. MediaMath has a really strong bidding algorithm that works really, really well. I saw really good performance advertising now, and got really good ROAS. But there's some limitations to its targeting. It's not as granular as maybe you can get in DoubleClick. Trade Desk it seems to be pioneering programmatic as a whole, and getting access to programmatic TV, they're talking about programmatic audio in the next couple of months. But again, it has some drawbacks as well. I think that's the biggest thing. It's just, I'm an Excel nerd, so I always create spreadsheets of all the features, and I conditional format of what I think what I rate them, and that's ultimately how I did it. But again, it's one of those where you just have to maybe trust your gut over time.
Yeah, and I think there really isn't one size fits all answer, or there wouldn't be so many options. So I think that
Exactly.
it goes into, determining what are the most important features or aspects to your company and what you think you want to get out of the programmatic service, and letting that drive your decisions.
Exactly.
So we're going to take a break here and offer a special offer, for the Hanapin marketing listeners. Bryan, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we're offering what we call here at Hanapin a solutions blueprint account analysis. So essentially, this is a free custom account analysis for companies that spend over $15,000 a month. Um, what you get with that is one of our Hanapin experts will take a look at your account, compare the structure to and results to what we're seeing in the industry and what other people what we see with Google, what Google send us, and what we talk about with Google. And then it's just basically a double check. We work on a fresh set of eyes in the account from one of the PPC heroes here at Hanapin.
Right. So for those of you that are still listening at 50 minutes into this webinar, you can go ahead and respond to that poll if you'd like a free account analysis from Hanapin. And we have a couple more questions to finish us out today. So the next is, how do you manage a programmatic strategy when you're not doing it in-house?
So I think for me, I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier on, is the transparency that either your agency is, if your agency is managing, or if you're using a third party vendor. It's just the transparency into how your campaign is performing. So looking at are they willing to give it for cyclists, where your ads are showing, looking at their true CPC or true CPM and what you're actually paying, as opposed to maybe a set CPM that you're just paying them for a set amount of impressions for within your budget. I think for me that's the biggest thing. I've worked in an agency previously where when I started programmatic, we used to charge a set CPM for volume impressions, and over time we started to see quality dwindle, and we shifted our pricing model to be that more transparent and be to show that this is what actually you're paying, and this is where your budget's being spent, as opposed to, you still see a lot of companies out there who maybe you're paying $2 to $3 CPM, and they may be only paying 10 to 15 cents CPM for that inventory. And it's like anything in life. you get what you paid for. So if you're paying 15, 20 cents CPM for inventory, chances are it's not a high-end site. It's more a local blog or a low-traffic blog that's really not getting a huge amount of impressions or a huge amount of uh, highly intentful traffic as well. So I think that's the biggest thing is asking for transparency and holding them accountable for performance is the biggest thing.
I would agree. I think that communication is really key for whichever side you're on. So if you're, an in-house team that's working with a programmatic vendor, um, communicating, what are our goals? How are we accomplishing those goals? How is it coordinating with our other marketing or PPC specific strategies? Or if you're the agency, like you and I are, Bryan,
Mhm.
controlling or managing the programmatic and working with an in-house team, communicating to them the performance that we're seeing and really being open and transparent about, for instance, the quality of the leads that are coming in. Maybe they're coming in at a higher cost per click or cost per impression, but if the value of those leads is increasing, then maybe we're on the right track.
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely goes both ways. So, I've had clients in the past prior to Hanapin where, we're getting a lot of leads, but the client doesn't communicate back to us how good those leads are until we come to the end of the month or we come to the end of the quarter and it's a screaming phone call. Well, you got 1,000 leads, but only one of them was actually good. Whereas I think if they have that two-way conversation and then like open transparency on both sides, it definitely does help as well.
Agreed. All
So I think
right.
that leads
Last
us.
question.
Yeah, I think that leads us into that. It's similar to sort of type of questions. How do you measure transparency in programmatic? I mean, there are so many layers and there's so many different vendors and so many different charges. I think it goes back to, the end of that last question is if we're starting to, if your DSP is able to give you transparency into the reporting as well as uh, you're starting to see overall quality improve. So if you're paying a little bit higher CPM, if you are managing yourself, but you see the quality of leads improve, I think that's the biggest trust factor I see. That I know the traffic I'm getting, even though it may be higher or than I may be getting GDN, I know the quality is better, so I don't feel as turned off by it, or the client isn't as worried about it if they know that that lead is more likely to turn to a sale, or that visit is more likely to convert into actual direct revenue. So um, again, I think that's a big, you talk to your before you sign on with DSP, or you talk with your account manager if you're currently working one, and ask them about the different layers. And if they're most of them I've worked in the past are very willing to really go into the nitty gritty if you need them to. But again, it's about that open transparency and just not being afraid to ask those questions, or to dig a little bit deeper into what the reports are giving you, or things like that.
Yeah, thank you. Um, we are almost out of time, but we wanted to add in just one more question that came in during this webinar, and that has to do with using multiple programmatic platforms at the same time. And the question is, how do you ensure that conversions are not double counted when using several programmatic platforms at the same time?
Yeah, so I think that's the billion dollar question right now is get the true attribution. I mean, there are multiple attribution tools out there. I think for me, generally what I've seen, if you use a third party ad server, so something like DoubleClick Campaign Manager um, or any of the third party ad servers out there, you'd be able to get a little bit more transparent. So rather than hosting your ads in the actual DSP, creating the campaigns in an ad server, trafficking them, and tracking your conversions out of your campaign manager, it's a little bit easier to track across multiple campaigns and track the conversions through that. When you're using multiple DSPs, if you're hosting everything, you have multiple conversion pixels, you have multiple um, uh, audiences, multiple ads running that you can't really keep track of altogether. it gets a little bit harder to really to show to show which one is actually driving the conversion. If it's a view through from a, I use an example, if you're say running media math and you're running double click, someone might see the ad from double click but clicked on the ad from media math. So they both get like media math gets the click through conversion, which is deemed a higher value than a view through conversion. When realistically, because someone saw the ad on double click, they might be, it creates that imprint on your memory, and then when you see the ad again from media math, you click it, and then you get the direct conversion. I think it goes back to using a. I think the easiest way I found is using the ad server and looking at the attribution reports from the ad server. If you're using multiple DSPs and essentially trafficking your campaign, and the best terminology, if you core back in your campaign from an ad server and then using their attribution tools in there.
Yeah, and I think going back to what we were talking about earlier of analyzing the performance of your account as a whole, and even with those view-through conversions or assisted conversions that we see in search, how is that impacting our overall ROI or return on ad spend?
Exactly. I think that's it goes back to that. Remember, there is a funnel. It's not just always going to be a last click or a last view. It's about, you have to take into that overall marketing strategy.
All right, well, that is all that we have time for today. We want to thank you all for attending the webinar. If you want to tweet to either Bryan or I or both, we'd love to hear from you. Again, you can use that hashtag ThinkPPC. You can also contact us directly at marketing@hanapinmarketing.com with any follow-up questions or feedback that you have. And we thank you all for coming.
Thanks, guys. Have a good rest of your day.